he becomes, you know, persona non grata and is now being arraigned at the Hague court. Right. Exactly the same thing, in so many words, has happened to Saddam Hussein.
Who was, though, in terms of, he was supported by the American government, but his infrastructure and military power and installations were all provided by the Soviet military, by Soviet military intelligence. Yes. And the Soviet military intelligence would not be creating his military garrison state on a charitable basis without controlling him as a captive puppet.
Yeah, that's right. Now, I can't comment on that side of it, but what I can comment on is that there is an aspect of the Iraqi story which, of course, has never appeared in the mainstream press and probably never will, but we can have a go, all right? And that is that there was a computer program by the acronym PROMIS, P-R-O-M-I-S, which was developed by an American expert called William Hamilton. And this program, in so many words, enables a user to see inside another government or another bank's database if the other party has got the same program. Now, this program was given by the United States by McFarlane, who was the National Security Council chief, wasn't he, at one stage? Yeah. Or the National Security Agency, I forget. This was handed to the Israelis for certain reasons, because the CIA can do certain things and it cannot do certain things in the United States, and employed the Israelis to do it, to do them. The Soviets wind up with this program because the Israelis gave it to the Soviets or sold it to the Soviets. And
if we didn't, indeed.
If the Americans didn't. Yeah. And it winds up, quote unquote, on the Soviet black market and is picked up for $2 million by the Iraqis. So you wind up at a certain stage in the 90s where the Iraqis have got a copy of PROMIS. Now, when I mentioned the black operations money, this money is offshore, and the reason it's offshore is that it's connected with the semi-privatization of American intelligence, which occurred as a consequence of President Reagan's Executive Order 12333, under which certain intelligence operations were, quote-unquote, privatized. Now, if you think about this for more than a split second, you can see how incredibly dangerous this is. Because we now have, in the United States, a number of organizations owing allegiance to very important people, such as George Bush Sr., and various others we could name, who appear to have been operating as sort of add-ons or standalone intelligence organizations, although they are contracted to by the various so-called American acronym intelligence agencies.
Right, like the CIA.
Right. Now, as a consequence of this, these people, or elements within them, believe that some of this money, which is offshore, this black operations money, should be paid to them. So there's a war going on within fragments of American intelligence to gain access to these funds. And this is the most incredible thing that I have ever heard in my life. And it is something which the American public knows absolutely nothing about.
But it would allow for people like Mikhail Gorbachev or the current president of the new Russia, Vladimir Putin, who actually is, if I'm correct, an officer of the Soviet military intelligence.
He's a GRU officer, not a KGB officer, as is widely stated.
Yeah, Soviet military officer and under Soviet military discipline. The present president of the Soviet Union, who's supposed to be our ally in the war against terrorism, these guys can get paid off for the role they're playing.
They did indeed, and both Putin and Gorbachev, or the other way around, Gorbachev and Putin, were paid $1 billion each, with a promise of $30 billion each to follow. Now, according to my information, which I'm unable to go into, we don't know whether, in fact, the second tranche of the $30 billion was paid to them both. I suspect they were scammed, because intelligence scams people, that's what they do. But what happened was that the Soviets took this money. I mean, it wasn't just them who were bribed. It was very senior people, including, I suspect, Primakov, who we'll come to in a minute. These people took the money and said, thank you very much. And then they of course, have continued with
the same
world
strategy,
revolution.
the same work they were doing before, promoting the same strategy.
Yes.
Now, let's also note that the principal goal of the Leninist strategy of using terrorism is not just to do the harm that the terrorists do to people and physical property, but to get the target government to respond in a tyrannical way, or we sometimes say the action is in the reaction. As a consequence to this, we have this huge, enormous, draconian new bureaucracy in the United States, the Department of Homeland Security, which has now tremendously invasive controls that violate individual rights of our citizens in the name of fighting terrorism, and recently passed Patriot Act legislation, which will eventually provide for the same kind of internal passports or identification papers that were used in the Soviet Union. And you have in Europe these European arrest warrants coming that would enable the European Union to arrest citizens without any recourse to civil liberties within all of Europe and Britain.
Yeah, well, I'm very likely to be arrested. I mean, because criticism of the European Union is xenophobia, right? Under the specially designated crimes within this particular program. But you mentioned Primakov, and this is very appropriate because Primakov has recently been appointed as a special consultant to the Department of Homeland Security. Now, Yevgeny Primakov is the architect of Middle East terror. He's the key architect.
The key architect and controller of the communist, the KGB terror network, PLO directorate.
That's correct.
And he's our new American government's consultant on fighting terrorism.
Now, I published this story recently, and I had it from 3 separate sources who were not connected, right? I've had a lot of emails saying, where did you get this information? And people trawling the internet, saying that they've been looking for this information, and they can't find any source except Soviet analysts. Well, I stand by my story, right? And in this issue, I just would like to read this. Primakov, this is what I wrote. On being appointed, in a recent interview, Primakov said amid cynical laughter that he couldn't wait to join the Pay Corps. And that a large number of former, I always put former in apostrophes, of course, former KGB generals and colonels were lining up to join the rush to be signed up for the American official payroll.
Yes. To fight terrorism.
To fight terrorism, which the Soviets are themselves responsible for.
Directly continuing to direct and coordinate.
Correct.
And unfortunately, the American government, principally through $1 billion given by the Bush administration to the PLO portion of the directorate, is funding and financing. And yet the American government's response to terrorism is to impose such dictatorial garrison state controls on American citizens that fingernail files can be confiscated from people at airports, something that Adolf Hitler didn't even dream about doing.
Well, that may be true. But
once again, Christopher, we barely scratched the surface. I just want to thank you so much for being with us today and hope it'll be an impetus for our viewers to research this and look into it more. If you're interested in what you heard today, would like to know more of the background and read more about it, have access to these sources, it's very important that you do. Please contact us at the phone number and address given at the end of the program. We'll make sure you have access to them. Thank you so much. This is Bill McElhaney for the McElhaney Report. Thank you for joining us today.